talking about Occupy tomorrow, ACTV is going to be on the ground at Zuccotti Park from about 3 to 5. We're going to try to be talking to a lot of people, whoever kind of shows up. We have one of our staffers, Messiah Rhodes, is going to be interviewing people, and he has a show on YouTube and Twitch called Black Power Magic Hour. Oh, that's cool. Really fun to watch. And so we should, I know, isn't that a great name? Yeah. And so we definitely are going to, you know, whoever shows up. So there's going to be, you know, some eccentricity there. Mm-hmm. One thing we're concerned about is any kind of anti-vaxxer contingent, which are not welcome on our broadcast. But
yeah. And that, you know, that's something that, because that's kind of where the conversation will eventually go, is today and into the future. What we've learned from Occupy, what came out of that, and like what you guys see as next steps directly related to the anniversary, as well as more in general about where we are as a society today and our biggest issues. But I certainly remember that about Occupy, just the incredible diversity of people and of philosophies. And, you know, that tends to happen when it's a little bit more of an open-ended concept behind it. I mean, to me, it was pretty clear about why you guys chose the location you did and the key targets, you know, what the focus was, you know, the major polarization between rich and poor, and, you know, the banks getting bailed out and us getting screwed and things like that. But so, you know, nowadays we see that too with anything that isn't like, this is explicitly about this topic. You know, if it's a more general, like, you know, if you protest an inauguration, you're going to get the full spectrum of people, you know, why they're there. So you could probably expect some people protesting COVID regulations, but it doesn't exactly fit the narrative of Occupy or what we're trying to get across.
Well, no, I mean, like I said, Occupy, it was definitely a, you know, economic, that was what kind of ignited it. But the fact that it was the 99% meant that everybody was welcome. And, you know, everybody from the homeless people to the celebrities that would stop by. Yep. And my main role is, I wasn't an organizer, but I jumped on, obviously the Arab Spring I found very exciting. So as soon as, like, within a week of September 17th, I'm like, oh my gosh, we have this coming here in New York, right, going on right now. So I went over there, and then I just kind of went on a website that some of the activists had set up and said, hey, how can I help? And I'd already been working in publishing in magazines and media. So I just started compiling lists of media coverage. And what was super exciting was, first of all, how much, you know, compared to how kind of small the occupation originally was, is how much media coverage there was, and how you know, approving it was. Mm-hmm. It was like, I mean, there was, you know, that was before the Andy Ngo kind of stuff. That was like, it was very, you know, people were like, this is great and this is interesting. And of course, you know, they're always looking for the next shiny object on cable news and in, you know, kind of in this centrist progressive kind of circles. But I was like, this is what, you know, activists dream of. It's like so much greater than the sum of its parts. Yeah. And what happened was, it was like, everybody, you know, you just couldn't, it was the right time, the right place. And the organizers that did show up and did have the most success with it were people that were already organizing and were ready to run with it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that, you know, that brings up so many interesting things. And I feel like, you know, at 312, we may as well just continue on as if this is it. Yeah. So, you know, the first question that comes to mind is, can you speak to whether it's Occupy, but, you know, using Occupy as an example, the importance of the narrative as told by media, whether it's independent media or mainstream media. When we talk about things like a general strike now, one of the biggest components that I've learned, you know, should be a part of this is knowing that when you're going to make that statement, we are committing to a general strike, you need to have the media support, not focused, so to speak, on the celebrities, not focused on a couple lead organizers, not focused on random beefs that may be happening, but in the case of a general strike, these are our demands and here's why. So tell me about how that worked in your mind with like connecting the movement to the story being told to those who aren't there physically.
Well, I mean, I think what happened back then is it was just a happy convergence, and a lot of the, I mean, I know like a lot of local papers, you know, your Village Voice and that, they definitely came there and they were excited. And, you know, the sympathy of the writers that were already occupiers in their hearts, you know, and then it went on to people like mainstream people like, you know, Chris Hayes and, you know, all kinds of, Michael Moore, of course, you know, but not so much the celebrities. I think that, once the narrative about economic inequality and the failure of trickle down, I think the journalists were already pretty well aware of that, and especially with the you know, the financial crisis and disappointment with, you know, Barack Obama not jailing any bankers. I think that was ready. General strike, I'm not sure if we're ready for it. I support it in my heart, and I would participate for sure. I think people need to be educated about the history of general strikes, and, you know, because I know so many people, you know, if you say to them, you know, rich people should be taxed, they're like, yeah. And then when you say general strike, their heads, you know, start scratching, you know. That's why Occupy at the beginning, there were also a big contingent of anarchists. And I definitely would not speak for that community, but they were the ones kind of pushing the kind of the radical agenda. And there's been a lot of you know, beefs and things within that. But if you have people who are kind of expressing the possible, then you can kind of drag maybe the people who are center or progressives to the, you know.
Absolutely. I totally agree. When, you know, just to close out this part of the conversation, as far as a general strike, you know, that's the statement I've been making too, that we're not ready. To me, the biggest reason we're not ready, in addition to not necessarily having that media where we need it to be, primarily it's that we don't have the mutual aid infrastructure in place to ensure that the everyday people, working class people who are risking their lives essentially to not go to work, are going to be supported. And the more times we throw out the concept of the threat of a general strike without being certain we're ready for it. And by that, I mean, just to be clear, beyond a one-day thing like is planned for tomorrow, like an actual sustained general strike until they meet our demands, we're not ready to put that many people at risk. And so it's a privileged position to be in a, you know, to have a job that you don't have to worry about that kind of thing and sit on Twitter and say general strike. It doesn't work that way. The other really interesting thing you mentioned was, you know, the radical contingency, so to speak. And I always make that remark too when people push back on me in regard to abolition. I'm going to be the one to say we need to abolish the police. We need to abolish prisons. If that sounds too radical to you, we can talk about all of the steps that I see being necessary to get us to that point. And I think you're going to agree with a lot of these points. And if you don't want to talk about abolition, but you want to talk about police brutality and the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, and you're running for Congress, that's great. I'll be the one to continue the narrative about why abolition is the end goal. We can still be on the same side if you're not willing to say those things, given the position you might be in. Priscilla, thanks for joining.
I'm sorry, I got confused with the different links, but I'm here now. And Damien should be here a moment.
I don't blame
I'm sorry.
Priscilla knows a lot about, is definitely somebody who's working on general strike stuff. If you want, I think Priscilla would be a good person to weigh in.
Priscilla and I have known each other now for a number of years. You know,
online, virtually.
Yes. Good point. And probably the concept of a general strike is when we really first started talking the most, back like in April 2020. And that was before I learned a lot of stuff. And I was one of those privileged people on Twitter saying general strike. And I learned, like, I don't think I'm helping by doing that. I mean, it took a lot. And we in the same way I now know how to do it.
I have questions for you, Mr. Awkward.
Go for it.
So where do you live in this world? You live in New York City, right?
I moved out of New York City. I couldn't get my
Okay.
wife to live in the city with me. So
It's okay.
I
So
live
where are
upstate
so
now. I live
you live
upstate.
upstate?
Yeah.
So are you involved in a local mutual aid effort?
I do virtually nothing locally. I work on national things because I have received, we already talked about this before you joined, but I've received a number of death threats for the work that I've done, the anti-fascist work that I've done predominantly. And so I do mutual aid.
Well, there's all kinds of ways in which you can do mutual aid. You know, I'm part of one circle that is on Signal, and so everyone's pretty when it's vetted by people who bottom line the group. And you know, everybody's vetted in it, and there's no personal identifying information that goes through, but people shout out needs all the time for both themselves and for their local community members, and we're able to do that. So that's one model that would be good for somebody who has problems with death threats. The other thing is, you know, there are lots of mutual aid circles that are popping up all over the United States. One I worked with in Brooklyn over last year that delivered, you know, 100 pounds of food to, you know, over 100 families per week, delivered to their house, which is really useful if you're like organizing around rent strikes and things in which you don't necessarily want to leave your house because you know, are literally defending your place in this world.
Yeah.
And in order to get to that point, we have to practice. You know, practice makes perfect. And so the more we all engage in these things on the grassroots level in our local areas, the more we're going to see possibilities of it popping up. To say we don't have a mutual aid infrastructure without actually like participating in the local effort and trying to push that forward, I mean, it's unfair because you're like wanting a world to be complete and ready to go, and it's not going to be ever, you know.
Well,
it's like people who say that they want to have a baby after they have like so much money in the bank. It doesn't work like that, you know.
But everyone has their own role, and so I'm working with
Sure.
Aid Hub.
Sure. But our role, the role of people online, the role of good editors and good writers online is to help imagine what the future is going to be and help imagine what are the pieces that we need to get into place in order to make that possible. And without possibilities being fostered, much like a garden, we're not going to see any harvest in the end. But we have to practice, we have to show up, we have to, as communities, start putting into place these alternatives.
I live in a place that is not as important as, say, Bushwick, Brooklyn. When I lived in New York City,
I would argue that, like, you know, they had barn raisings and whatnot, like in the 30s. I mean,
okay, but listen,
as someone who grew up in the rural South, I think those opportunities for supporting each other come in different ways in that area. Sure, but they're just as possible.
But you're not letting me finish a single sentence. And
Sorry.
I'm not really sure why that is. This isn't the subject of this interview. We're talking about Occupy. And we can get into how that relates to mutual aid efforts now. But I mean, just so I can clarify, those who know me know very well that I've been doing mutual aid work since I was 12 years old. I did it in Connecticut, where I was raised. I did it in Poughkeepsie, where I went to school. I did it in New York City, where I lived for 15 years. I'm not doing it as much now, but I am focused on national initiatives like abolishing the police through 10 demands and through building the mutual aid infrastructure and supporting mutual aid groups across the entire country through Mutual Aid Hub. So while I'm not on the ground with my hands in the dirt as much today, I don't disagree with you at all about how important those individual autonomous groups are.
Yeah, totally.
So, you know, before, you know, so I think what I would like to do is just go back to when you guys kicked this off. describe for me, what I'd like, just in your words, as an initial organizer, what were the thoughts going through the collective's minds, the individuals who were showing up for these initial organizing meetings? What were the conversations you guys were having? And what was your goal with basically taking over this park?
So, I mean, honestly, I can't speak for a collective. I can only speak for myself in this interview.
What were you hearing from the people who comprised this loose collective?
Well, the idea was to occupy Wall Street, and everybody who showed up like understood that Wall Street is the base of all of our problems. They manipulate everything from culture to policy to media to whatever ideas people think are innovative. And everybody understood that that was the vision. And when I first showed up, there were, many of the meetings, I only attended, I think, 3 meetings before the actual occupation happened on September 17th. There was a group of activists who were involved in an occupation at Gracie Mansion called Bloombergville, calling out gentrification. I think that happened in the spring. And so they were really like the crew of people who were really taking the Adbusters call super seriously and trying to get people to sleep in the park, which I was not initially going to sleep in the park myself at the time. I mean, I had an eight-year-old daughter that, it was just she and I. So but I wanted to support all the organizing around it in whatever way I could. And at that time, like, we all literally thought it was just going to last over a weekend, but it was really great because, like, literally any idea that seemed halfway decent that would work, everybody was like, he should get $600 of peanut butter to make sandwiches to feed people. That sounds great. Let's do it. I don't know, in a lot of brainstorming efforts I find myself in these days, there just seems to be a lot of ego tripping around things and not like, just, sure, that sounds like a good idea, let's just go, And it was really just energizing and pure in the effort. So when I first got there, I had been part of organizing a workplace, an organization I worked at, because we had a very bad executive director, and that happened in 2004, maybe 3. But our office had been organized by the Writers Guild, with the Writers Guild, and we didn't unionize, but we just like collectively worked so that the executive director was removed from power. And when I was introduced to people, I was introduced to someone who was with the Writers Guild, and I was like, oh, I worked with this organizer. And they're like, oh, yeah. And he was like, oh, so what are you doing these days? And I was like, some media here and there. Like, I just finished founding a radio station called Real Punk Radio. And he was like, perfect. Like, you should come and work on the media efforts. Like, we're trying to think about how to promote it online. And I can introduce you to this crew of people that seems to be working really well. And there's this other blog that people have been talking about. So I just started like hopping around the park and people and and moving between the media and the direct action stuff, because I'm really in love with, direct action gets the goods. So it's like, as a media person, I want to know what the direct actions are so then I can know how to support online best, because there's a lot of information that needs to go out for people. Like, this is a new thing for them. It's weird. It's a new political idea and imagination. Like, you want to make sure that they're welcomed with proper information online so that they can take that next step, right?
Absolutely. And Kelly is one of those people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was gonna say, yeah, I didn't sleep in the park, but I did meet Priscilla around that time, and Priscilla leaves quite an impression.
They say that about me too, Priscilla.
But what was interesting, I found interesting as somebody who's interested in media, and not just like, who, what, where, when kind of media, but like, how do you change someone's heart? And I feel like Occupy, not only did it change the heart nationally and internationally, I feel like everybody who went there, it was a small amount of people, but I mean, not to, the cliche, it was the friendships we made along the way, but so many people there, for some reason, they're like, oh my God, here are my weirdos.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I literally thought I would
do a bunch of cool ass shit, it's like.
So I hear two things at the same time that are, and I don't mean this as an insult at all, I think this is like really telling about where we are today. I hear it, it changed hearts and minds all over the world. I totally agree. I mean, there are rappers who have no political interest whatsoever who are beginning a song, Occupy Wall Street, Occupy all streets. Like when I heard Sean Price say that, I was like, okay, it's everywhere. Then Occupy the Hood sponsored my music video. And then they're occupying in countries all over the world. And that's incredible. And it gives, literally, I have chills talking about it. And yet we're at a place today where Priscilla's saying, when we organize now, it's a bunch of egos. So what did we learn?
Oh no, not in Occupy.
No. I know.
My entire professional life, like
I know.
not talking.
I'm not talking about Occupy
sure.
either. No. Don't worry.
Okay.
I don't mean within the Occupy circle. I mean, we wanted Occupy to
in general.
us. Yes, in general. And so Occupy, what is the lesson from Occupy? What did we gain from it? And like, what is happening now in these other organizing circles that we're not carrying on that spirit?
I mean, that's a really hard question because I usually am not thinking deeply personally about organizing circles, because really what I want to just make sure is amplify efforts, and that requires so much of my brain that the construction of what organizing circles look like are very less interesting to me. And when they get complicated and further outside of the actual work, I get less interested. Just kind of double down on just making sure that the work gets out. Does that make sense?
Of course. Yeah. But I mean, so you're talking about the way that you're kind of working around it.
Yeah.
Do you think does it say anything about, I mean, all right, so instead of talking about like maybe the negative side of it, let's talk about the positive. Like, let's start with, what was it like being there? Any memories or recollections of specific experiences that are illustrative of what it meant? And then what I've seen a couple people respond to my tweets about in Eugene, Oregon, Occupy explicitly led to this. Are there other examples of that?
Yes.
Where we know Occupy achieved XYZ.
Oh yeah, many. Everything from ACT TV, which is a media company that I work for, to the People for Bernie, which was electoral based. Not everybody at Occupy was on board with that, but if you trace that, you'll see that not only, I mean, no one would argue that Bernie Sanders has had a kind of galvanizing presence on the left here, and everything from, his message that he'd been honing for, decades, had a bunch of, young people like treating him like a rock star, which, is not necessarily the point of it, but the fact that people are like, oh my gosh, rich people are not paying taxes, or, oh my gosh, our student loans are absurd, and things like that. And you trace that all the way to like, the growth of the Democratic Socialists of America, which, I'm a member of it. And, they do some great things. And for example, right now in Buffalo, where I'm from, they're probably going to have a socialist mayor. I mean, if powers that be let that happen. And that's that you can all trace that from Occupy. And then just, I won't belabor this too long. You also have things like, like the strike debt movement, Black Lives Matter. A lot of occupiers went into Black Lives Matter. And that was huge. And that was like Occupy in that it was way bigger than the sum of its parts. And it was like, you can't stop a movement.
Totally.
And then,
totally.
So and then now and then now we have the climate movement. Yeah.
And
But I don't think that we would have gotten the pandemic assistance, unemployment assistance in the way that we got it without the Occupy movement organizers going into politics in different arenas. Like, seriously, I mean, I don't know, I'm 47 years old. That kind of actual material assistance has nothing like ever. So
yeah. Yeah, and nor was it anywhere near what it should have been, but to get anything
sure,
it's a big deal. Yeah,
it was a bigger crumb than before.
absolutely. And I know D-Ray was quoted maybe in a Guardian article. He said something about kind of what you were saying, Kelly, that, you know, we being Black Lives Matter, not we being me, we looked to the lessons from Occupy to achieve what we achieved, to build what we built. Have you guys heard anything else like that?
Yeah, I heard the same thing about DeRay, but I do know that, you know, that people who went to Occupy events or at Occupy went to, you know, St. Louis and all that.
Yeah.
And last year during the pandemic, when we had everything happening here in the city, a lot of those people were galvanized, and you know, people who had the same banner, who, you know, built new banners, you know, friends of mine. So so it was definitely of a same. It was linear, you know.
So
but Occupy wouldn't have happened at all without all of these movements prior. Like, you know, without the Haitian Run, Occupy Wall Street would not have happened.
Great point. And Kelly,
it's a very long line.
Kelly hit on that too. And before you joined, and said, like, the people who made it happen were the ones who were organizing, were ready, and ran with it. So can you speak to that a little bit more? Like, the kinds of things that predated Occupy, and you know, the way that, you know, groups were able to work together and under this kind of umbrella of the 99%.
Yeah, no, like the unions were incredibly helpful to a lot of different efforts in the park, and supportive. At that time, Working Families Party, which, you know, we all see where that's gone, which is amazing for them and amazing for us. We're actually going to have our lives materially improved in many ways. So yeah, and you know, there were also ACT UP activists in the park who were helping coordinate efforts. There were also people from Egypt and from Spain, from the gay movement. You know, and enormously helpful in a million. You had the nurses who came in, the nurses union gave flu shots to everyone.
Wow.
During, at Zuccotti Park, they just came in with flu vaccine out to whoever wanted it. Like, you know, it's interesting. The groups that came together. You had the pilots union that came out and did like a whole action on Wall Street. I mean, everybody knows what the solution is going to be is what's controversial.
Okay, speak to that.
What is the solution? Who knows? I mean, there are people going on strike all over the street right now. And it's very heartening because they're getting what they're asking for, union or no. So we're in some interesting times right now, and I'm excited to see what happens tomorrow with people, if they come out or not, or if they come out. You know, we're actually entering into a month of Occupy, if you will, because the camps that sprung up around the United States, they really, you know, it started from like late September to late October and even beyond that, you know. Because November, it was mid-November when Obama ordered the closure of all the the destruction of all the camps through the Mayor's Conference of the U.S. Naomi Klein wrote an article, or Naomi Wolf wrote an article about probably the best article in the Guardian, and we all know how controversial she is now. But but yeah, it was a coordinated effort by the federal government to crack down, a bunch of people who wanted a better world for each other.
Yeah. And for those of us who were either too young at the time, or who just were living under a rock, and just weren't paying attention to what was going on, what in your words, what drove this to, do you think, spread the way it did, and what do you think was the biggest reason? Because you're like, what was, or at least what was the language that Obama used to make it okay to put an end to this, so to speak?
What was the language? That I don't know. I wasn't in the conference call.
Well, I don't mean literally. What was, like, because you're saying that this, like, the way that we look at it, and I look at it the same way, is these are all people who want to make the world better for everyone, not just for the 1%. But I'm sure he said something like vagrants and violence and public space, and and there's a lot.
But the reality is, in any public space, there are those whom some would call vagrants. What is a vagrant? Is a vagrant? It's like somebody who does not have a house right now. And whose fault is that? That's really the fault of the society that said vagrant. So it's not the vagrant's fault. It's the fault of the whole fucking system.
Yeah.
And you're going to have that and violence, because men are violent when they're in public space together. That's what dudes do. And there is a lot of work that needs to be done around that by dudes for dudes. Absolutely. But yeah. So,
I think Obama was not really kept his hands clean. I think he let the brunt of the responsibility go to people like Bloomberg.
Uh-huh.
And the funny thing about Bloomberg is, like, de Blasio came and supported Occupy. So it's like, that helped him get elected. So right. I think that, yeah.
And I think that, and then we see what happened with him, and he's a fraud. And so, like, that, I think, seeing that, because I got just as many people saying, and you accomplished nothing. And they talk to me as if I'm the one. I'm like, whatever. I'm not the one who did this. I'm trying to talk about it with the people who did. But anyway, I know you like to insult me, and this is another opportunity. I don't agree that it achieved nothing. You guys and others have pointed out things that it did achieve. But I think that there is validity to looking at, like, what happened to de Blasio is just one of many examples of, like, we make a lot of steps of progress. We're starting to see these material conditions improve, as Priscilla's talking about. And then we take all these steps backward. We get a Donald Trump. We get the architect of mass incarceration following him up. So, and then, and now we know a lot of truths about Obama that that all the hope we had back then, is probably extinguished by.
Yeah, but it's good to think of the politicians. They're going to be late to the party no matter what. Just today, Joe Biden, and whatever you think of him, he gave a speech where he was talking about CEOs making too much money and wanting the whole country. And he's kind of playing the good cop to the kind of corporate Dems who want that sweet, lobby money to keep flowing for themselves and for whatever reasons. But the fact that we have somebody like Joe Biden today saying CEOs, should make less money and rich people should pay their taxes. And then, of course, AOC wearing a dress, saying tax the rich. Whatever you think of as a corny stunt, things change. And then when, young people are saying, hey, we don't tax rich people. It's like, well, yeah, no, we don't.
Or the corporations they run. Yeah. But someone said something really kind of obvious, when to us, it will be obvious to you when I say it, like when we think about it. But it was a good point that no one else was making. Yes, AOC's dress was a stunt. Yes, she went to a $12,000 gala and with $1,000 dress or whatever the heck it was. I don't know if the numbers are switched, but every form of protest is performative. And I was like, you're right. Like, we're not actually changing a law when we block a street. We're not actually changing a law when we show up on the lawn of a congressperson's home. but that
But
performance.
maybe if, you know, our newspapers and media actually covered the things that we have to take drastic action to get attention for.
Exactly.
You know, and I mean, where is she going to do that in front of those people? Like, she's going to be able to do that at a nonprofit gala, like at the New York Public Library? Are you kidding? No, they depend on their donors. At a for-profit, like, you know, event, like the gala, it's like, it's perfect. It's awesome. Like, if you're going to do that, do it there. And it was a collaboration between her and a designer, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I just think men like to hate on like really smart, gorgeous women who they could never have a chance with.
I love her. I love her.
She is their queen. They should bow.
Yeah, I mean, come on, like, you know, I think a lot of us don't actually understand what it's like to be a member of Congress, and so it's probably a lot harder to get things through that, you know, that we, the idealists on the streets, think it is. I mean, I don't trust any politician, but I also know that until there's a full-scale revolution, one of the most effective ways at a local level of changing policing, for instance, is to elect people to the city council who are going to actually listen and start defunding the police and putting that money into alternatives.
Well, you have to build a block of power, which is exactly what the squad is doing, and they're expanding. And that's exactly what, you know, all these people who are bought by corporations do. It's just their block works for Goldman Sachs and not for like the environment. So, you know, we have to build power in these ways if we're gonna like anything. And imagine when those dinosaurs, those fossil fools, as the kids say, when they're all gone, we're gonna have a lot of, you know, and we have to think about it as like current. You know, we're living life. There's no path, you know. The best path that I've seen myself is it's a video that The Intercept did a few years ago called Years of Repair. It's on YouTube, and it is the most beautiful film that Molly Crabapple illustrated it about what the future could look like. But we have to understand we're going on a path that has not been lived before. World we need, we have not seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people waste a lot of time, you know, collecting things they can complain about the people who are in power instead of doing the actual work. And so it'll be nice to see if, you know, I mean, it was nice. I mean, believe it was more than nice to see the uprising of 2020. It was the longest period of sustained protest in our nation's history. I'd love to say that it resulted in less funding for police and less murders of Black and brown people. That hasn't happened. Murders by cops are up 100%.
But an op-ed was published in the New York Times said, yes, we literally mean abolish the police. That would have not happened 20 years ago.
Exactly. I love
we would get this place.
I love your perspective. I do.
Relentless optimism is the only way forward.
I need to keep you around because, as you know, before we started this, I was telling you I'm a freaking mess. So yeah, I need more of that positivity. You're right. That couldn't have happened 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. The Black feminist leaders who've been pushing abolition for decades
are finally at the front.
Yes,
as they should be.
100%.
And that movement was extremely popular. That was actually polled extremely high for whatever, you know, whatever you think of polling. But the fact is that it's actually gone down in polling because of the, you know, relentless right-wing demonization of an actual anti-police brutality movement. I mean that it's other things, but the fact that it's like, you know, are people actually arguing that police should be more brutal? I mean,
they figure out a way.
I mean,
and they figure out a way to talk about it in a way that like old grandmas are going to be like, of course they don't mean that. They just of course, like
Yeah.
police, you have to have police. Like, you know, it actually requires unlearning a lot, and that's hard for people. And
I like reminding people there was a time before policing and there will be a time after policing.
I can't wait. And on a positive note, to your point, there were over 20 cities that defunded after 2020's uprising. Millions of dollars were reallocated. So yes, positives. And so now 10 years after Occupy, there's a lot more talk of a general strike. I know people like you are out there doing the mutual aid. I know Mutual Aid Hub is working on the infrastructure. I hope that the threat is so powerful that we don't need to have one, that they're like, holy shit, you're actually going to succeed if you do it. So we're going to give you what you deserve beforehand.
Yeah, and I think I think the most interesting thing angle that could go in is if the gig economy takes it seriously. If you get your Ubers and your Amazon delivery dudes and girls, and you know, if you get the seamless delivery people, that would be a real deal, and it would hurt, or just the idea of it would hurt.
Yeah, I mean, Christian,
the stock market would freak out. Yeah,
100%. He said to me, like, it won't take long for them to buckle. Like a couple of days of an actual general strike, they're losing millions every day. These billionaires are going to lose their minds, and they're going to say to the politicians, pass this law now, because we will not tolerate it. And of course, we know the politicians will listen to them.
They got rid of this anti-trans law in Georgia because all of the entertainment companies are going to pull out. Like, it's money that runs America. The United States is one fucking business. It's horrible. I mean, you watch the news and you'll have at least, like, out of 25 minutes of news, you have at least 10 minutes of them telling you about the new iPhone that's coming out. That's gonna be like $1,000. Oh, by the way, it has a security update that the government's been spying on. Next.
Yeah. By the way, you know, you may get cops show up at your house because they've stolen your data and completely misunderstood something. And, you know, hopefully you don't get shot because of it, but, you know, no big deal. So, all right, what's the plan for tomorrow and onward? What are we taking from 10 years ago and putting forth going forward?
Callie?
Well, I mean, the plan for tomorrow is literally we're going to start some stuff and start, you know, going back to the park. I think there's also going to be some Extinction Rebellion actions, nice. The decolonization movement, which is something I'm not too deeply involved in, but Priscilla can talk more to that. That might be the next thing after the economic inequality. But I definitely think we're going to see, you know, people kind of finding their own voices, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Okay, so for those who can't make it, are there action or can't make it in New York City downtown? Are there actions planned elsewhere in the country?
Yes.
Yeah, the Los Angeles is happening, and the more I keep talking to other cities like Oakland and Boston, and they're all planning anniversary dates of birth of their parks.
Nice.
So of their squares. So yeah, and we'll be reporting on those on occupylst.nyc, as well as what happens over the weekend. On Friday, what's really interesting to me is that 12 Extinction Rebellion New York is having having action at the New York Public Library, which should be super because as you both knows, the board of directors of the New York Public Library are who's who, the economic titans killing us every day. And then down in the park, there's going to be, I think Richard Wolff is thinking about coming down to do a talk.
That's awesome.
And the People's Puppets are going to be down there. There's going to be a lot of activity. And then at 5 o'clock, Decolonize is working with a formation around the city. They're going to be meeting up at Columbus Circle. They have like with the quotes around it.
Oh, because it's Columbus. Gotcha.
Yeah, Columbus Circle. Because we just have to call it that for
Yeah,
right now until we decolonize it. But Decolonize This Place is an amazing formation that everybody should be following. We have stuff up about them on IWKWORD.nyc. Also, you know, the People Strike, which is a formation based out of Mississippi with Cooperation Jackson and the Black Socialists. They're following and supporting different actions. It's hard because they're down in Jackson dealing with flooding right now, lots of flooding, and doing a lot of resource coordination between Jackson and New Orleans and the whole area around it that's just been decimated by the storms. So, you know, they're just doing it. You know, the mutual aid stuff, it just has to happen because otherwise people are not going to survive. I mean, we're really in a climate apocalypse right now. We're in this total economic apocalypse. I mean, we are creatures of this earth. There's no reason why we have to have money every day to survive. Everything that we need is on this planet. It's just these individuals that have homes, addresses, families. They are directly responsible for the deaths and destructions of peoples all over this planet. And it has to end. It has to end. And we have to make it end here in New York City to start because, you know, if you can make it in New York City, you can make it. So
no better place to do it. And you guys proved that 10 years ago. So is for anybody who is chronically online, what would you ask them to do? Is there any way they can show support?
I mean, the biggest thing I feel myself is online activists have a real opportunity and possibility to make sure that you fill in the gaps of our labor history that we actually have. That isn't taught in schools, our labor history, our history of the different peoples on this planet and in the United States specifically, because the more you learn about that, the more that becomes, you know, your understanding of the place that you live, the more you're going to want to work towards a future that serves everyone and not just the individual, because we haven't evolved over tens of thousands of years through working in a individualistic, you know, bubble. Like, we've worked together always as a peoples. Like, that's what we do. We trust each other and we help each other.
Yeah, I think as a media person, that's super important. I would say on a personal level, what thing Occupy did, it was actual people outside of the internet doing stuff. So I think wherever you are, if you can find something, you know, if you don't have want to join the whole movement, find one aspect of it that is interesting to you, whether it's, you know, mutual aid societies, volunteer for something, you can keep it keep it local. And then if it's part of a bigger thing, I'd be interested, Damien, our teammate over here, is actually in a red state. And I'd be interested what his experiences, the Occupy legacy there.
Well, it's hard to say, you know, no one really talks about it. I was in New York at the time. In general, I would say that the activists here kind of see it through the lens of Fox News or through more conservative media. They'll repeat a lot of the same things that you would hear from Fox News, like they didn't do anything, they just sat around in the park, you know, they were just a bunch of kids without jobs. Mm-hmm. All those things are repeated by activists, I hear. Here, and I think that it being a red state, that it really had a hard time translating.
Right. You know, and so I have a question for you, because of your unfortunate surroundings. You know, one of the things that people misunderstand a lot of the time, if we're talking about a general strike or something, it is not a Democrats initiative. It's not a leftist initiative. It's a poor people's initiative. It's a 99 percenters initiative. It's a working people's initiative. And we have to be able to figure out a way to engage people across or around the political spectrum or circle or whatever it is, because we all have that one thing in common, and that is that we're poor and they're rich. And, so those conversations happen a lot about like, how do you, or can you, or should you organize with someone you don't politically agree with? I'm curious about your take. My stance is pretty simple. Like, if the person is a part of a Nazi organization, I'm not organizing with them.
Right.
On the other hand, if someone has reformed, if someone has actually taken those generations worth of disinformation and undone it in their brain and now want to be a part of the larger people's movement, I have absolutely will organize with them. But when you're surrounded by predominantly Republicans, like, how do you kind of even broach the subject of the 99 versus the 1%? Because they're a part of it. They just may not know that.
Well, let's see. The on a daily basis, the poor people that I hang out with and that are as poor as me, that my friends are not white. So it's difficult, that's my only perspective. So among everyone I know, the idea of the 1% and the 99%, or workers organizing, or at least the problems with work and capitalism, all that's just common daily consciousness. So it's hard for me to say, because I'm never around.
I'm happy for you.
The rest of the community. So
yeah. All right.
It's when I
think we lost him.
You muted yourself, Damien.
Oh yeah, there you go. You're off mute.
Whoops. 6, 2. Hold on, sorry. I've got all kinds of things going on. So when I drove for Uber, I could talk to people about gentrification. If you approached it in the right way. And that was the only thing I could find common ground with people about. In terms of working, I mean, that idea is so ingrained in Southern culture, the idea that you work and you don't complain, and that you brag about being exploited and having to work constantly. So I have no idea. Long story short, it'd be very
so
difficult.
That's where Kelly comes in, right? I mean, that's where Priscilla or I come in, like reaching those people and helping them to understand the history and their position, and maybe that they don't have to feel pride about being exploited, pride about working hard, yes, but if you unionize or organize another way, maybe you can work, as hard as you want and get paid a living wage, as opposed to what is probably happening right now. So,
there's been a whole history of union organizing down south that has been wiped away from the history books too, like really big, bad battles that actually happen like along racial lines too, because of a lot of complications of racism in the South, and how it came out of the system of slavery. But all of that history, like, imagine if people could come of age in that area knowing that history and seeing how they had been manipulated by the 1% basically since day one of after genocide in that area of the country. I mean, that's the thing, all of that, everything of the United States is like maybe 150 years old, all of it. Like, that's how badly they fucked up our environment in just like 150 years.
Civil rights era wasn't that long ago, I mean, And yeah, and I think having these discussions is one of those ways, because it does show people that there is like a line of history that Occupy falls within. It took stuff from the past and provides things for the future. And as complex as race is down south, it's also equally complex in a completely different way up here.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because like here we have the neoliberals and the white saviors, and who believe and are really proud of.
New York City has the most segregated schools in the entire country, and we think that we're so liberal here. It's
New York
horrible.
State is one of the worst for educational equity. I mean, that's why AQE exists. So yeah, I mean, is there any other is there any other message that you want to get out to those who are confused about where they are in history today and how they can make an impact, or what they should do in their local communities? Or is there anything else that you took from your experience organizing at Occupy that we haven't touched on that you think people should know?
I mean, people should find their people. Anything worth being done has to happen with others. And so you need to find your people. There have always been people who have been working on this stuff. And now that we have these digital tools, it's easier than ever for us to create way better, stronger networks than ever before. And that's how we should be using these things, to weave these networks together so that we can strengthen each other, because the white saviorness is not what is needed. What is needed is to actually show up as an ally, as you are asked to do. And maybe that happens in allyship with with frontline organizations. Maybe that happens from afar. You have to bring your best self to these things and drop your ego at the door, to really just, because we have so much work we have to do together. And the 1%, the powers that be that are holding this system in place as much as they can, they would rather see that we fight each other than that we fight them. So we have to focus on them. They are the target, not each other.
Beautiful.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just thrilled with that response. And anything you guys want to add, please do.
I just wanted to add, it's a small thing, kind of a practical thing about organizing, but it relates to what Priscilla was talking about. That if you are in a position of power, or you're in a group and you're organizing already, or you're in a circle, and then people join, instead of them becoming kind of secondary because they've just joined the circle, to ask them, like, what can you do? What can you add? What are your ideas? And to begin to expand it that way so that it takes on a life of its own.
Great point. And I'll just throw it in there that Mutual Aid Hub does a great job of that, for what it's worth.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah, my last thought on that is apathy is the enemy. Don't let a crisis go to waste, because those in power are not letting a crisis go to waste. They're going to find every way to exploit and divide and profitize it, so that it's up to us to, be the change.
Wow.
And we'll do it.
Beautiful. Thank you guys so much. I know you're crazy busy because you got all this stuff going on tomorrow. And I'm sure you're doing other interviews and stuff too. I really appreciate all three of you. Occupy will forever be in our history books. It's incredible what we as a people across the world were able to achieve. And just, I mean, to know that it started with those meetings, in New York City, it's an honor to be able to talk to you guys about it. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Seriously, thank you for having us. This is awesome.
Absolutely. I'll continue to amplify the stuff going on tomorrow, and fingers crossed, maybe we have another Occupy, who knows? That'd be pretty incredible. So,
Friday is moving day, so Monday you can get to work.
that's right. That's right. All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.